Hey everybody, my name's Caleb Ballmeyer. I'm the founder of Helping Captives. We're so excited for you guys to join us on our Helping Captives online training. You know, for the last 10 years, God's had us on a journey. First, to really understand what trafficking is, and then to try and figure out how to help kids be safe from being trafficked, and then how to help women that are actually coming out of trafficking. So we're excited to be able to share some of these trainings with you. First, we're gonna go through Sex Trafficking 101, just an overview of trafficking. Then we're gonna go through a class on grooming and how traffickers groom people to get into human trafficking. Third, we're going to go through a training on how to keep your kids safe online. And then fourth, we're actually gonna have a training on how to work with survivors. So if you're looking to open up your own organization, if you're looking to volunteer, that's a great training for you. I'm going to be going through 2 of those classes with you, and then my Chief Program Officer, Anya Coma, who is a licensed therapist and a master's degree counselor, is actually going to go through 2 of those trainings with you. So be looking forward to those. She's an amazing person. She's got such a plethora of understanding of what trafficking is and how to do best practices in working with survivors. So we're excited to do that with you and look forward to jumping in. So let's dive in and let's get right into Anti-Trafficking 101. Helping Captives is a Christian anti-trafficking and support organization serving the Spokane and Northern Idaho regions. We exist to honor God by providing opportunities for freedom and safety to those exploited by sex trafficking through prevention, intervention, and recovery services. Many women end up getting into lifelong abuse, addicted, and even die in the life. Our organization really works to empower people to fight trafficking and help survivors in our community by providing a safe place to really heal and breathe. We were actually founded in 2015. Originally, we were founded as a ministry to partner with churches and other organizations. Really, my heart in 2015 was to just have a family outreach organization to help churches get more involved in their community. Anti-trafficking wasn't really even on the radar of my brain. However, as those outreaches grew, we started hearing more stories of anti-trafficking stuff happening in our city. And then what actually really changed the direction of our family and the organization was we had somebody come in to meet with my father, and she told him her story that she'd been trafficked by the age of 6. But why it was changed our family's direction so much was that person that came and talked to my father was actually my next door neighbor and a babysitter of mine. So this was a person that would come over and spend time with us, really deep, had a lot of deep connection with us. We loved and cared about her. And she began to open up and tell us her story that the only reason she would come over all the time to our family was because we were the only safe family she knew of. And so that kind of broke my dad's heart. And so in 2015, he retired from 30 years at working at a homeless shelter, came over, and we opened up the first safe house in our area. Originally, we thought we would help 2 to 3 women, but instead we had 21 women go through our house in 9 months. And that really opened our eyes to how bad the trafficking problem was in our area. Around that time too, we found out one of my coworkers had been trafficked. And so for me personally, that's why we got into the fight. That's why we got into this work. And as the organization has grown, originally we had food bank, food distribution, young adult house, all sorts of different ministries that we were doing. And in 2022, I think we decided we needed to shut everything down that wasn't anti-trafficking related and just put all of our attention into this area because it was such a big problem in our community. We were having women come into our office on fentanyl, wanting out of the life, and we just really needed to focus and try and be the best anti-trafficking organization that we possibly could be. And so that's what leads us here today. So that's a little bit of our story. Maybe if you're in this, you might have somebody that's near and dear to your heart or somebody that you know that was abused or trafficked. You might be sitting on the other side of that camera and really having a heart for this. And I just want you guys to understand that this is real. This does happen in our area. This does happen in our cities, in our nation, and it does happen to people that you know. It can easily happen to somebody you deeply love and care about, and so that's why we do what we do. The first thing that Helping Captives does is prevention, and so really 3 things that we focus on is prevention, intervention, and recovery services. The best way I could describe this to you, I was actually at a conference and I heard somebody from Atlas Free get up and use this example, and I thought it was an amazing example. he said that in anti-trafficking work, you're going to have three different types of organizations. And you're going to have those that prevent trafficking through education, and then you're going to have those that intervene through rescue, and then you're going to have those that provide recovery services. And so he explained that, if you were sitting right outside and there was a river about 20 yards from you, and you saw a bunch of kids drowning in that river, you would need somebody that would run to the community and say, hey, stop going down there, kids are drowning. And that's really what we're trying to do through prevention and education training, is run to our community and say, hey, sex trafficking's happening, there's stuff happening, there's kids drowning. We don't want to see this happen anymore. Stop going this direction because kids are drowning. Then you would need people that would dive into the water. And in the United States, mostly that's law enforcement, homeland security, organizations that are government funded that really go and do a lot of that rescue. And then finally, you would need organizations that were on the side of the river. Once somebody dove in and rescued them, that would be sitting at the edge of that water saying, hey, now that you're rescued, now that you're safe, let's help you heal. Let's help you process all that trauma. Let's help you give you hope to get through that so that you can have an amazing future, because that trauma of going through trafficking is extreme. And so that's what we do, is we really focus on prevention. We work with organizations that do intervention, and then we focus highly in recovery services. So that's what Helping Captives does. First, we're going to dive in a little bit and go through some break some myths of trafficking, kind of see where you guys are at. We're going to do a little true and false. Sex trafficking primarily happens in poor, underdeveloped countries and not in wealthy countries. Do you think that's true or false? The answer to that is false. Sex trafficking occurs in most all countries of the world, including the United States. One of the statistics that blew our mind was that North America accounts for more than 50% of the world's sex trafficking. Next question. Traffickers only target victims that they don't know. True or false? False. Many victims of sex trafficking have been trafficked by intimate partners and family, including spouses and parents. Next question. People being trafficked are always physically unable to leave, and they are locked up against their will. That's false. While that is sometimes the case, it's more common that victims of sex trafficking stay for reasons that are much more complicated, such as trauma bonds, emotional manipulation, fear, and a lack of resources to be able to leave. Sex trafficking always involves moving or transporting a person across national or state boundaries. That's false. Sex trafficking does not require movement of a person in any capacity and can happen in a survivor's own hometown or even in their own home. Trafficking is often confused with smuggling, which is the illegal transportation of a person across the border. There is a massive difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. However, sometimes they coexist, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Sex trafficking does not always involve moving or transporting somebody or kidnapping somebody like you might think if you've watched Sound of Freedom or the movie Taken. Only young girls are sex trafficked. This is also false. Nearly 75% of sex trafficking victims are adults. While the majority of victims are women and girls, men and boys are also victims of sex trafficking. The average age of child trafficking is 12 to 14 years old, with a 2-to-1 ratio of girls to boys. So, what is sex trafficking? The legal definition of sex trafficking is the act of using force, fraud, or coercion to induce someone to engage in a commercial sex act. This can also include recruiting, harboring, transporting, obtaining, providing, patronizing, or soliciting a person for this purpose. Sex trafficking also includes inducing someone under the age of 18 to perform a commercial sex act. Even if force, fraud, or coercion is not used, if somebody compels a young person to perform a commercial sex act, that's immediately a sex trafficking charge. So what is a commercial sex act? A commercial sex act can include prostitution, pornography, and any sexual act in exchange for any item of value such as money, drugs, shelter, food, or clothing. It can include prostitution, it can include pornography, it can include OnlyFans, it can include webcam businesses. There's a lot of different ways that a commercial sex act can be done. And this is when it's done for any exchange for any item of value, such as money, drugs, shelter, food, or clothing. So breaking that down a little bit more. What is force, fraud, or coercion? You're going to hear that all the time in the anti-trafficking world, because force, fraud, or coercion are the most, is how you would define whether somebody's being trafficked or if they're performing sex work on their own. So the definition of force is the use of a weapon, the use of such physical strength or violence as is sufficient to overcome, restrain, or injure a person, or inflicting physical harm sufficient to coerce or compel submission by the victim. Examples of fraud. The definition of fraud would be the wrongful or criminal deception intended to result in financial or personal gain. So when you're basically tricking somebody to think that they love you, but really you're just trying to get them to fall in love with you so you can sell them into the commercial sex industry or get them to perform commercial sex acts, that would be fraud. So examples of that would be promising somebody a job, promising them a romantic relationship, promising them shelter, promising them drugs, promising them material possessions, promising them essential resources, promising them transportation, and then saying, if you want these things, now you need to perform a commercial sex act. That would be fraud. That would also be under sex trafficking. And then coercion. The definition of coercion is the threat of serious harm to or physical restraint against any person, any scheme, any plan or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that failure to perform this act would result in serious harm. All right, so one of the ways that traffickers would use coercive means is they might withhold pay. They'll say, if you don't do this, I'm not giving you any money. If you don't do this, I'm going to hurt you. That would be threats of physical abuse, physical isolation. If you don't do this, you're not going to be around anybody. I'm going to put you and lock you in a room. You're not going to be able to see anybody. You're not going to be able to see your kids. I'm going to brandish a weapon and stick a gun in your face. A trafficker is either going to force drugs on them so that they can control them more, or a woman might just end up becoming addicted to drugs just so that they can get through the day from all the trauma and all the abuse that they're about to go through. So what sex trafficking is not, it is not smuggling, and it is not sex work. So we're going to talk a little bit about smuggling and then sex work. That's what sex trafficking is not. More than multiple times a week, I get asked, what's happening at the border? This is a frequent question, something that's, when we're filming this is a massive question that's asked right now in the United States. People want to know what's going on at the border. There's a lot of people illegally coming into the border, and they are thinking that that's all that trafficking is. It's that smuggling of humans across the border in or kidnapping them or throwing them into containers. But trafficking is more exploitation based and smuggling is more transportation based. And so human trafficking involves exploiting men, women, or children for the purpose of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. So we at Helping Captives work with sex trafficking survivors. We don't necessarily focus on labor trafficking. There's other organizations that do that. We focus on sex trafficking victims. And so human smuggling, however, involves the provision of a service, typically transportation of fraudulent documents to an individual who voluntarily seeks to gain illegal entry into a foreign country. Here's why people oftentimes confuse them, is because a lot of times human smuggling can turn into human trafficking. So we've heard horrible stories of stuff like that happening at the border. Somebody pays to try and get into the United States. Part of them getting into the United States is then they are forced into performing commercial sex acts. They're abused at the border. There's things in Texas that I've been to called rape trees, where they actually move them across the border and then they tie them up to a tree, abuse them, throw their lingerie in trees as a trophy. And so they started trying to get in the United States by being smuggled in the United States, and it turned into trafficking. But smuggling is more transportation-based, trafficking is exploitation-based. Oftentimes they coexist, but there is a difference. You do not have to be smuggled to be trafficked. You can be trafficked in your own home city, by your own parents, by your own family members, by people you know. As long as there's force, fraud, or coercion, and somebody's manipulating you to perform a commercial sex act, that would be sex trafficking. What is sex work? So when a person willingly takes part in the sale of sex, it is consensual and it doesn't affect their human rights. That is called sex work. Although that is illegal in most states, it is not sex trafficking. So when a person willingly takes part in the sale of sex, that's sex work. And sex work, they get to keep the money that they earn. They set the parameters that they're comfortable with. They can say no, they can quit at any time, and their personal rights are not being violated. There is no force, fraud, or coercion. However, spotting the difference can be difficult, and oftentimes they cross paths. So somebody might be getting into sex work, and then all of a sudden they get caught up in a situation, and now they're being trafficked. The differences can almost be invisible. You may not recognize a trafficked victim because you think that they're just a sex worker. You may see a girl on the streets looking for work and assume she is a sex worker, but the reality could be far from it. And so that's why we do these trainings. So yes, sex work is different from sex trafficking. However, sometimes it's really hard to spot the difference. And so it's important to ask questions and to not assume that somebody's doing sex work when they could be being manipulated, tricked, forced, or coerced into this life. Human trafficking is exploitation. We want to be very open about that. It is the selling, the trading, the using and abusing, the renting, the taking advantage of another human being. It is exploitation. It is the #1 fastest growing criminal industry in the world. The top 3 criminal activities worldwide are drug sales, now human trafficking, and then weapons and arms sales. So it's actually surpassed the weapons and arms trade. It is something that is happening all over the place, and we need to be aware, and we need to be educated on what's going on in our communities and in our nation. Human trafficking, they estimate that there's 35 million people every day are victims of sex trafficking worldwide. 20% or 7 million of those are children. Over 50% of the world's sex trafficking happens in North America. Does it happen in our area? So we're up in the Pacific Northwest. We're right on the border of Idaho and Washington, and it does happen in our area. We're right on the Washington side. However, we're like 15 minutes away from the border, so we work with northern Idaho as well. But Washington State has the 6th largest concentration of past and current sex trafficking victims in the United States. You know, when I first got into this, it was about 2015, 2016. There was a sheriff named Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. And I sat down and met with him and was just asking him questions. And he told me this story. He said, Caleb, we just did a sting where a police detective said that she had a 6-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 12-year-old for sale. And we put it up on Craigslist, and we had more than 1,000 potential buyers respond to that ad, and it actually crashed our servers. And that was right when we were getting into this, and it just blew my mind of how much trafficking and how much pedophilia and how much stuff was actually happening in our own communities. It broke my heart. I know from 2021 to 2022, Idaho saw a 271% increase in human trafficking. In Coeur d'Alene, we were just talking to somebody, an actual youth pastor was caught in an online sting, charged with 2 counts of enticing children through the use of the internet. Constantly there's different cases of people crossing from Washington to Idaho. It's just happening all over the place. Here's a next screen, kind of shows you a little bit of some headlines or some stories just in our own area. And so if you're in the Coeur d'Alene, Eastern Washington side of things, just know it is happening in our area. Pre-existing vulnerabilities of victims. So this isn't all of them, but we just want to throw some of them out there. We get into a little bit more depth in some of the other trainings, but pre-existing vulnerabilities of victims would be a runaway, the foster care system, somebody going through the foster care. We had a woman that we work with, went through 17 foster care families, and then when she was aging out, she ended up running into a trafficker, and she was trafficked for 14 years. And she was just looking for love and looking for care, just wanted to have some form of long-term commitment. She had been through 17 foster families. She just wanted to be with somebody for a long period of time, and this person told her that he would provide that commitment and that stability and that he would never leave her, and the only thing she needed to do was perform sex work. And so she started doing that and then got addicted to drugs. And so the foster care system can be a pre-existing vulnerability. Somebody that's a prior trafficking victim, sometimes, or somebody that's been in the industry can oftentimes get trafficked because they've been told from a young age the only thing they're good for is sex work or the use of their body to make money. And So there sometimes can be a vulnerability to find somebody could find them and try and manipulate them into doing more sex work because they're already halfway believe that this is all that they're good for. Substance abuse is a massive pre-existing vulnerability. If you're homeless, that can be a pre-existing vulnerability. If you have undocumented immigration status, or if you're in poverty or massive financial insecurity, these are all things that traffickers oftentimes are looking for. They're trying to just find somebody that has a vulnerability that they can exploit so that they can make money. Different types of sex work. That can include pornography, street work. I know for a lot of us, we just immediately think of a prostituted person being on the street, but it's more than that. So they can be tricked or manipulated or even forced to do porn videos. So if you're sitting there watching porn and you're addicted to porn, you have no idea that you could actually be furthering trafficking in somebody's life. And they could be being forced against their will to perform this video for you while you sit in your house. Street work, strip clubs, and exotic dancing. We have heard multiple stories of women that we work with that were brought to strip clubs to try and desensitize them to the sex industry, and then all of a sudden they were told that they needed to go and perform in these strip clubs and bring home X amount of money or they wouldn't be able to see their kids. There's truck stops, there's massage parlors and nail salons. We have a lot of massage parlors up in our area. I was just in Houston, Texas. They have about 500 massage parlors that they're constantly trafficking women through. There's the internet hotel or out-call systems. There's escort services. There's sex tourism. And then there's actual mobile units where people will pay to go into a vehicle and sleep with somebody. So there's a lot of different kinds of sex work. One of the big questions we get asked all the time is who are the actual traffickers or the recruiters? And so we want to take some time and just talk to you about 4 of these. The main one that we see, about 60% of victims actually get recruited through the boyfriend method or the Romeo pimp. And so this is somebody that preys on young girls and women in person or online. They make them feel special, accepted, and loved by being their boyfriend. Then slowly they manipulate them and push their boundaries until they demand that they have sex with others or engage in online exploitation. And so this is something that is really sad to see, but this is a huge tactic. This is something that these guys use. I was listening to one person that was talking about training others on how to the pimp game, and basically what he was saying was that they would go in, they would literally find these women that he thought would he could make money off of, and he would just do everything he could to make them fall in love with him. He would sleep with them. He said it didn't work unless you actually slept with them. Part of this is you have to make them think that you really love and care for them, and then but the whole point of it was for them to fall in love with him so that he could slowly manipulate them to go into commercial sex acts. And so that is how they do it. I've got a story of a dear friend of mine. She was 13, her mom and dad got a divorce, and she was living with her dad. They moved over to Seattle, and they were living in a motel, and her dad was drinking and smoking pot all the time, wasn't really sure where she was at. She was just kind of hanging outside the motel, and a guy in his 30s, okay, she's 13 years old, this guy's in his 30s, he was literally looking for an opportunity like this. And so when she's sitting outside and there's not a lot of, her dad's not really paying attention to her, all of a sudden he starts befriending her, buying her McDonald's, taking her out to dinner, buying her clothes, and just acting like he cared about her, wanted to be like a father figure to her, and just that he really cared about her. And so over time, he starts to isolate her, starts to tell her, hey, your dad really doesn't care about you. I care more about you. Why don't you just move with me to LA? Why don't you just come move into my house? And, just tell your parents that you're moving on, like they don't really care. This is all the stuff he's feeding her brain. So then all of a sudden she writes a note and says she's moving away. She hops in the car with this guy and he starts taking her down to LA. And once they get into Bend, Oregon, he starts to tell her, hey, listen, I am going to take care of you. I am going to buy you clothes. I am going to buy you food, but it's not going to be the kind of clothes that you would ever choose for yourself. And I'm going to actually be putting you on the street, and you're going to be making me money. This is how you're going to be able to take care of me, and we're going to be a part of a family, and you're a beautiful girl, and we're going to sell you, and you're going to make money. This is how you're going to pay rent. And anytime she would try and escape or leave, he'd beat her and throw her in ice baths. But she got groomed into this because he made her feel that he really loved and cared for her, and she really wanted that attention and really wanted that love. She was one of the lucky ones to be able to get out of the life. She was able to escape, but actually ended up going through years and years of drug addiction and a lot of pain from all that trauma. The other way is the recruiter. So this is somebody that traffickers will often send out their top girl to recruit others. They call her bottom girl. The girl will flaunt her new clothes and lure other young women into sex trafficking by glamorizing the life and offering acceptance. She then introduces a new girl to her trafficker or pimp, and he begins to force or coerce her into the life by exploiting her needs. If you guys are familiar with the Jeffrey Epstein case, this is one of the things he would do, is that somebody would come to his house to perform these massages. If they didn't feel comfortable doing that, he would let them leave, but only if they would recruit other people. And so that's kind of one of the games they do. They actually train other young girls to go and recruit their friends. They might give them phones, clothing. So they'll provide those items for them as long as they go and get their friends. And so they'll go tell their friends might notice they got a new watch, they got new Jordans, they've got a new phone, and they'll ask them how they got that, and they say, oh, I just go meet with these guys, and they take me out on dates, and they take good care of me, and they kind of trick and try and coerce them to get into the life. And so that would be how they do it, is through the recruiter technique. The other one is the enabler. This is somebody that's looking for women or girls that are already into drugs, already into the party game, and so they're finding these women, they befriend them, and then they offer to buy them drugs and alcohol. Once they get them addicted, it's much easier to force them into prostitution. And so they actually are looking for people that are already kind of getting close to the edge of being addicted, and they just enable them with more drugs and alcohol and try and continually get them addicted. Finally is that violent pimp. This is the most violent and cruel. These are the ones you think of in the movie Taken or Sound of Freedom. They're the ones that will ambush people. They'll kidnap you. They'll beat you into submission until you agree to have sex with men for money. Most pimps will badly punish girls if they don't bring in enough money. Even if somebody isn't up front a violent pimp, oftentimes that can turn into violence or threats of violence to continue to have these women continue to do the work that they're doing. So those are four of the main types: the boyfriend or Romeo pimp, the recruiter, that's somebody that's going and recruiting their friends, an enabler, somebody that's just trying to enable them by giving them more drugs to get them to perform commercial sex acts, or that violent pimp. So how do sex traffickers lure their victims? The main way that we're seeing right now is online. There's also pre-existing relationships that most of the people that are abused, I think 1 out of 3 women will be abused by the time they're 18, and most of them will be abused by somebody they know. 4% of ways of recruiting them will be through the street or on the track, and then 1% is in a bar or a club. So you can see that most of the ways that traffickers lure victims is through online. And so we really need to be aware of who our kids are talking to. Since the pandemic, online recruitment has increased exponentially. We've seen a massive increase in online recruitment, 95% increase on Instagram, over 125% increase on Facebook. The internet was reported as the top recruitment location for all forms of trafficking. Most notably, the analysis found a significant increase in the proportion of potential victims for Facebook and Instagram users. And we're going to go through a lot more of that on our internet safety class, so please check into that. But traffickers oftentimes are using online to try and manipulate victims to get into relationships with them, flaunt things, flaunt houses, flaunt all the nice cars, all the things that these kids might want. Or they make a fake profile and act like there's somebody's, they're interested in whatever this young person's interested in, to build relationship and friendship with them, only to then finally get them to meet in person and then get them into the trafficking industry. So please go check out our internet safety class, but most of the recruiting now happens online. Huge question we get asked all the time as we're about to wrap up: why do they stay? Why don't they just leave? The reality is that humans bond emotionally to their abusers as a psychological strategy to survive under conditions of captivity. This is called Stockholm Syndrome. Anya is going to go through that a little bit more with you in some of the further trainings, but we want you to understand that it's actually a survival technique to just survive. They're just trying to survive this. And so the thought of even escaping sometimes doesn't even go through their mind. They're just trying to survive their captivity. I want to actually read something from the pimp game. This is an actual book, or a book that trains other people on how to pimp. So I want you to understand the mindset and the mentality of some of these people. They're going to call these women, they're not going to call women women, or girls girls. They're going to call them hoes. So I'm just pre-warning you if you're watching this. But here's a little bit out of this book. It says, a hoe's desire can't be fed because she has a need that isn't material. Security, love, acceptance, confirmation of one's self-worth, etc. Just as young men join gangs for the same reason, a hoe exchanges something she can see for something she can't. This leaves the door open for exploitation, misuse, and abuse. A Mac will sell a hoe a dream like a manager promising to take her to Hollywood and make her a star. By the time she realizes she's been had, she's trapped. She must want something, be it fame, stardom, love, money, respect, security. In order to be a hoe, she must want something. That something is what she is willing to sacrifice everything to have. That one thing, that need, is what you must obtain before the hoe does. You then sell it to her for her soul. If a hoe wants fame, love, it doesn't matter. You make her believe you can and will give her these things. Guys, this is what we're dealing with. This is the culture we're dealing with. These people are literally trying to find kids and women that want fame. They want love. They want acceptance. They want permanence. They want commitment. And they're trying to utilize something that God put in them, something that is designed in a woman to want safety and permanence and commitment. And they're manipulating that and selling them whatever that is that they want, only to try and get them to commercial sex work. I actually interviewed ex-trafficker, and we sat down and talked. And he told me, he said, what we would do first of all is we would ask questions and try and see if these girls had a father. If they didn't have a father, that was the first question. We'd say, can you please talk to us about your father, your dad? And if they had a good relationship, we may move on. But if they didn't, then we would continue to press forward. And then he said, well, all we would do is we try and figure out whatever their dream was, and we would just lie to them and tell them that's what we can offer them. So if she wants to be an actress, then we have connections in Hollywood. If she wants to be if she wants to be a musician, then we have access to studio time. Whatever it is their dream is, we will sell it to them and say that if they come with us and they do the commercial sex acts, they will become famous, or whatever they're looking for. If they want commitment, we'll provide the commitment. If they want money, they'll be rich. Whatever it is, we're going to tell them that we can provide that for them, just so we can manipulate them to get into the commercial sex industry, so that ultimately they can make money. And I think the average amount of money that a trafficker makes is about $250,000 for every person that they traffic or pimp. So the bottom line, okay? 99% of trafficking victims are never rescued. And the women that are rescued have very limited resources. That's why we exist. If somebody does get out of the life, what happens then? If you watch the Sound of Freedom movie, that young girl gets rescued, and at the end of the movie, she's sitting there banging her drum. And I can promise you that she doesn't just go in her room and bang the drum and everything's good. She's been through so much trauma. She's been sometimes abused up to 10 times a day, and she needs help. She needs spiritual help. She needs professional help. She needs trauma therapy. She needs a lot of love and a lot of care. And that's what Helping Captives is here to exist, to provide. One of the main things that you can do is you can speak up. The biggest thing that we can do is to try and decrease the demand. And the only way that that happens is by all of us communicating and speaking up that we're not for this, that we're against it, that there's better alternatives, that this is happening in our society, that we want to be able to change laws. We want to be able to give traffickers more time. We want to be able to give the buyers more time. We want to be able to put an end to this so that our women and girls are not being exploited. The reality for me is that I think most of trafficking starts in the junior high hallway. And what I mean by that is that culture is screaming at you as soon as you hit junior high that the most important thing about you, if you're a young girl, is your body and what you can give a man sexually. And when you're a young guy, culture starts screaming at you, that the most important part of you is your body count, and the culture wants to get you addicted to pornography and start looking at women as objects. And so it doesn't take long for somebody that's growing up and his brain's developing to look at a woman as an object, or that woman looking at herself as an object, to then all of a sudden get into commercial sex work, or for somebody to decide, hey, you know what, porn's not cutting out, it isn't doing it for me, I'm actually going to go buy an escort, right? And so that's kind of how this all happens. We have a generation of people that are addicted to pornography that also view themselves as objects. And so we want to do everything in our power to change that. So please speak up. Interaction with friends and family has been the top reported access point of stopping somebody from being trafficked. Okay, you might see something that you think is off. You might see something that you think it needs to be changed, or you see something that one of the people that you love, maybe all of a sudden now they're just they're dropping out of school. Their whole personality shifted and changed. You need to speak up, because you don't understand, maybe something in their life has drastically changed. Maybe they are being trafficked. Maybe they have been being recruited. You really don't know. And so if you see something or something feels off, please speak out. Too often times people will go, you know what, I thought something was off and I didn't speak out about it, and I wish I would. So we're going to go through some of the in the next classes of ways that traffickers actually groom, signs to look for, so that you can be more aware of when you start seeing certain things that you might look through a different lens, and you might be able to speak up. We want you to feel safe and have more of an understanding of what trafficking is, so that you can potentially save somebody's life. And one of the craziest stories I ever heard was a young girl getting out of high school. Her friend went through a training like this. He learned what traffickers do, and all of a sudden she starts telling him that she met this guy. He's a little older than her. He's gonna take her to Florida. He's gonna get her into the modeling career. She's so excited about it, and he just knows something's off. And he keeps telling her, hey, I don't know about this guy. I don't feel right about it. He starts bringing this girl to the strip clubs and trying to desensitize her to the life. He starts hearing about it, and he goes and talks to her parents. And she was so angry at him. She thought he had ruined her future because she was going to be a model and an actress. It turns out the guy was a trafficker. He ended up going to prison, and that young man speaking out actually saved his friend from being trafficked. And now she thanks him all the time. In this video that I watched, in this interview, she was so thankful that he went through the training and actually spoke up. So you need to be able to speak up. Other ways you can help is be praying. We are fighting against spiritual principalities, there's a lot going on in our nation right now. You need to be praying for America. You need to be praying for these young people. You need to be praying for organizations like Helping Captives and people that are in this fight. We need your prayer. Second, we need you to spread the word. Share about organizations like Helping Captives and what they're doing to help raise awareness. Share on social media. Use your influence. Gather people to go to a training. If you have a business, maybe take 1 month out of the year and give a percentage of the profits to a charity that's fighting trafficking. Just figure out what area of influence you're in, and then use that to try and spread the word. You can connect us or another organization like us to your school or your organization or your church to do a training. You can continue to decrease demand by you yourself getting help. If you're addicted to porn, you go get therapy. You stop looking at pornography. Decrease the demand. Vote. Change policies and laws. Donate, give financially. Maybe you're in a position where you can give and you're like, I don't really know how to help a trafficking victim, but I have money and I want to be able to donate. I want to give. Listen, it takes money and it takes professional staff to be able to actually provide the care that these women need. You can sponsor events, or you can even volunteer at an organization like Helping Captives, or volunteer at a fundraising event. So if you're in our area and you're in the Spokane Coeur d'Alene area, you can also go and shop and donate at our thrift store. All the profit from the store goes to our organization to help fight trafficking. Finally, the last thing is you can go through the rest of the classes. The other classes are going to be signs to look for, working with survivors of trafficking, and then internet safety, how to keep our kids safe from online predators and the apps that are commonly used for recruiting. So we want to thank you guys so much for taking the time, and we look forward to connecting with you in the next class. God bless.